There was a night when you heard something you shouldn't have heard, and since then your life has never been the same. Do you remember? That whisper in the darkness that didn't come from outside but from within, that had no human voice, but spoke words that pierced your soul like sharp blades? That moment when you were alone, vulnerable, shattered, and something began to say things about you that no one else knew, secrets you had buried, fears you never confessed. If you are a chosen one, you know exactly what I'm talking about, because that night was not by chance. It was not a hallucination. It was not your mind playing tricks. It was a test, a spiritual test as ancient as the very concept of election, as cruel as it was necessary, as devastating as it was transformative. And the question no one has asked you until today is, did you pass that test, or does it still hold you in invisible chains? Today I'm going to reveal something to you that will forever change the way you see that night. I'm going to show you that that whisper didn't come to destroy you, although it seemed so. It came to prove you, to separate what is false from what is true inside you, to burn everything that doesn't serve the eternal purpose that was engraved in your essence, even before you breathed for the first time. But before we get there, you need to understand what really happened in that darkness. You need to go back to that night, not with fear, but with courage, because it's only by revisiting this moment of absolute brokenness that you'll understand why you're here now, why you survived, why you still breathe when everything inside you screamed to give up. Are you ready to face the truth? Are you prepared to discover that what almost killed you was exactly what kept you alive? Let me tell you something about the chosen ones that no one has the courage to speak about. There is a moment in each of their journeys when everything collapses simultaneously. It's not one loss here, another there. It's not gradual suffering. It's a complete collapse. A specific night when the sky seems made of iron, when prayers seem to hit the ceiling and return empty, when God seems to have definitively turned his back. And it's precisely on this night, when you are more broken than you've ever been, that the whisper arrives. It arrives stealthily, like smoke seeping under the door. At first, you don't even recognize it as something external. It seems to be your own thought, your own inner voice, your own conclusions about who you are. But there's something different. There's a weight, an intensity, a surgical precision in the words that cut you exactly where you bleed the most. You are a failure, it whispers. God has grown tired of you. Your gifts were an illusion. Your calling was a lie. You wasted everything. And worst of all, that night it made sense, because when you looked around, everything confirmed those words. The destroyed relationships, the lost opportunities, the years invested in things that crumbled, the people you loved who abandoned you, the dreams that died, the promises that never came true. How do you argue with a whisper that brings evidence? How do you resist a voice that's only saying out loud what you were already thinking in silence? The chosen ones know this pain in a way that ordinary people will never know, because their pain is not just emotional, it's spiritual, it's existential. It's the pain of carrying a calling that no one sees, of being certain of a purpose that no one validates, of knowing you were marked for something grand while your reality screams the opposite. And when this contradiction becomes unbearable, when the distance between what you feel you should be and what you really are becomes too great, that's when the whisper finds fertile ground. Do you remember what it was like before that night? You had faith, you had hope, you were certain you were being prepared for something greater, but then came the sequence of losses, one after another. Every door that opened slammed in your face. Every person you trusted revealed betrayal. Every step you took toward purpose seemed to push you further away from it, and you began to question. You began to doubt. You began to wonder if you hadn't been fooling yourself all along. And God was silent. A silence so dense, so heavy, so absolute that you could feel its weight crushing your chest. You prayed, and nothing happened. You cried out and no answer came. You searched for signs and everything seemed to confirm you had been abandoned. The people around you prospered. They smiled. They celebrated victories. While you could barely get out of bed, could barely find reasons to continue, could barely remember why you had believed in anything in the first place. It was in this state of total devastation that the whisper found you, and when it began to speak, part of you felt a dark relief, because finally someone was telling the truth, or at least what seemed to be the truth. Finally someone was putting into words what you felt, but didn't have the courage to admit. You are not special. You were not chosen. You deluded yourself, and now you're paying the price for your arrogance. The pain the chosen ones carry in this phase is indescribable. It's the pain of having a spiritual identity that no one confirms. It's the pain of knowing who you are in the invisible realm, while the visible realm treats you like nobody. It's the pain of carrying a fire inside your chest that burns, that consumes, that keeps you awake at dawn, but that no one else can see or feel. And when you try to explain, when you try to share what's happening inside you, people look at you with pity, with distrust, or worse, with indifference. So you stop talking, stop sharing, stop seeking human validation. And in this isolation, in this desert of absolute loneliness, the whisper gains volume. It becomes your only company, your only certainty, your only constant voice. And slowly, imperceptibly, you begin to believe it. You begin to accept its sentences. You begin to agree with its accusations, because resisting hurts more than surrendering. But there's something the whisper doesn't tell you. There's something it hides with all its strength. And this is what I'm going to reveal to you now before it's too late. Before you make the irreversible mistake of completely believing the lies whispered in the darkness. Because while you heard that whisper on that terrible night, while each word pushed you deeper into the abyss of despair, something else was happening. Something you couldn't see, something you couldn't feel, something that would change everything if you knew. The whisper in the darkness has a name, has an origin, has a purpose. And it's not what you think. I know you believed it was your own mind collapsing, your own conscience condemning you, your own soul shattering, but it wasn't. It was an ancient strategy, refined through millennia, designed specifically to neutralize chosen ones at the most critical moment of their formation. Because there's a secret few know. Chosen ones are not forged in prosperity. They are forged in absolute darkness. That night was not accidental. It was orchestrated. It was permitted. It was necessary. Because you were about to cross a spiritual threshold. You were at the point of no return, where either you would die completely to your ego and be born as who you really are, or you would settle for being a mediocre version of yourself for the rest of your life. And the whisper came precisely to make that decision for you. It came to push you back, to convince you to give up before you discovered what was on the other side of that death. You know what the whisper feared most? That you would resist. That you, even without understanding, even without seeing a way out, even without having a single rational reason to continue, would decide to give one more day, one more step, one more breath. Because chosen ones who resist the whisper in the darkness become uncontrollable. They undergo a transformation that makes them immune to tactics that work with ordinary people. They develop a spiritual authority that doesn't come from human anointing, doesn't come from religious titles, doesn't come from public recognition. It comes from having looked into the abyss and having said, no. But let me tell you what was really happening that night while you heard the whisper. There was a battle happening in dimensions you couldn't perceive. There were angels recording every tear of yours, every moment you wanted to give up but didn't, every second you resisted the impulse to completely agree with the accusations. Because every time you resisted, even weakly, even silently, you were winning. And the whisper knew it. That's why it intensified. That's why it became more cruel, more precise, more relentless. Because you were passing the test without even knowing you were being tested. You were proving your identity precisely by refusing to deny it completely, even when denying seemed the only logical option. You were demonstrating that the calling inside you was stronger than any contrary evidence, deeper than any pain, truer than any whisper. And here's the truth that will set you free. God was not silent that night. He was restrained. He was holding back. Because if he intervened, if he consoled you prematurely, if he rescued you before the right time, you would never become who you need to become. You would always be dependent on external confirmations, always needy for human validations, always needing signs to continue. But true chosen ones walk when there are no signs. They believe when there is no evidence. They remain faithful when there is no visible reward. God's silence that night was the greatest gift he could give you, because it was in that silence that you discovered whether your faith was real or just emotional enthusiasm. It was in that void that you revealed whether your calling was authentic or just ambition disguised as spirituality. It was in that darkness that you proved whether you really were a chosen one or just another person who liked the idea of being special. And you passed the test. You didn't know it, but you passed. The proof is in the fact that you're here now, reading these words. Because chosen ones who fail this test leave. They disappear from the spiritual radar. They settle for average lives, bury their callings, silence their gifts, and spend the rest of existence wondering, what if? But you didn't do that. You resisted. Even when you had no strength, you resisted. Even when it didn't make sense, you resisted. Even when everything screamed to give up, you resisted. And now I'm going to reveal something even deeper to you, something that will give all that suffering a new meaning. The whisper was not sent to destroy you. It was permitted to reveal you. It was authorized to enter your life to expose everything that was hidden inside you, every insecurity you disguised, every fear you denied, every wound you pretended to have overcome, every mask you wore, every ego construction you confused with spiritual identity. Because before that night you had faith, but it was untested faith. You had convictions, but they were unproven convictions. You had a calling, but it was an unpurified calling. And God cannot use unrefined chosen ones, cannot trust eternal purposes to people who crumble at the first deep crisis, cannot deliver spiritual authority to those who have never been completely emptied of themselves. That's why that night was necessary. That's why the whisper was permitted. That's why you had to cross that valley of absolute death, because on the other side of that valley, you would emerge transformed. You would no longer be who entered. You would have died to everything that was false and been born as who you really are. And that person, that purified version of you, that's the person who can carry the weight of the purpose that was placed on your shoulders before the foundation of the world. But now I need to tell you what happened after that night, because most chosen ones don't realize it. But that test didn't end when the whisper silenced. It continues. It transforms. It evolves. Because now that you survived the test of absolute darkness, now that you proved your calling is real, now that you demonstrated you cannot be broken, you became an even greater threat, and greater threats receive more sophisticated attacks. The whisper now no longer comes as direct condemnation. It comes as subtle doubt, as disguised comparison, as discouragement masked as wisdom. It no longer says, you are a failure. Now it says, maybe it's better for you to slow down, be more prudent, not expose yourself so much. It no longer attacks your identity frontally. Now it questions your timing, your strategy, your approach, and it's more dangerous this way, because it's harder to recognize. But you who survived that night, you now have a spiritual sensitivity you didn't have before. You developed a discernment that doesn't come from teachings, but from experience. You know the smell of the whisper. You recognize its vibration. You identify its spiritual signature even when it comes disguised as logic, as common sense, as well-intentioned advice. And that makes you dangerous. That makes you uncontrollable. That makes you exactly what you should be. Now I need to reveal something to you about that night that will change everything. Something that was happening in the spiritual backstage while you agonized in the darkness. While the whisper attacked you, while you fought to survive, while every cell in your body screamed to give up, there was a transaction happening. A transfer. A transmission of something that cannot be taught, only received through extreme suffering. Chosen ones who cross through the night of the whisper emerge with something the Bible calls hidden wisdom. It's not intellectual knowledge. It's not information that can be studied. It's a deep perception of the nature of spiritual reality. It's the ability to see beyond appearances, to discern beyond words, to perceive beyond gestures. It's as if your spiritual eyes had been opened to a level that most people never experience. And with this wisdom comes responsibility, because now you see things others don't see. You perceive spiritual traps others fall into repeatedly. You identify manipulations others call movements of God. You discern falsehoods others celebrate as authenticity. And this puts you in an extremely lonely position, because sometimes you'll have to stay silent while you see people you love walking toward spiritual precipices, and other times you'll have to speak and be rejected, misunderstood, attacked. But this is the mark of the chosen ones. They are not called to be popular. They are called to be precise. They are not destined to have crowds. They are destined to have impact. They are not here to accumulate followers. They are here to free captives. And captives are not freed by soft words and comfortable messages. They are freed by cutting truths spoken at the right moment by people who paid the price of knowing those truths. You paid that price that night. Every moment you resisted the whisper was a payment. Every tear you shed was a coin. Every time you wanted to give up but didn't was an investment. And now, you have spiritual credit. You have earned authority. You have a voice that, when it speaks, invisible realms must pay attention. But here's the danger. Many chosen ones who survive the night of the whisper make a fatal mistake. They try to return to the life they had before. They try to reconnect with people who no longer understand them. They try to fit into systems that were created for people who haven't crossed through what they crossed through. And this frustrates them. This confuses them. This makes them question whether it was really worth it. Let me tell you something no one will tell you. You cannot go back. You should not go back. You were not made to go back. That night transformed you into something new, something the old world has no category to comprehend. You are no longer compatible with the circles where you circulated. You are no longer compatible with the conversations you had. You are no longer compatible with the dreams you dreamed, because you died that night, and what resurrected was something completely different, and that scares you, because it means leaving behind not only what was bad but also what was comfortable. It means embracing a loneliness of a different kind, not the loneliness of rejection, but the loneliness of election, the loneliness of being in a spiritual place where few arrive, the loneliness of carrying revelations most are not ready to receive, the loneliness of knowing truths that separate you even from those you love. But this loneliness has a purpose. It's not punishment. It's preparation. Because chosen ones are not called to live in tribes. They are called to build tribes. They are not destined to find their place. They are destined to create places. They are not here to join existing movements. They are here to initiate movements that don't yet exist. And it all started that night. That night when you thought you were ending, you were actually beginning. That night when you felt God abandoned you, He was closer than ever, watching, rooting for you, waiting to see if you really were who He believed you were. And when you resisted, when you refused to give up completely, when you decided to give one more day even without having reasons, something sealed in the spiritual realm. A mark was engraved. A decree was established. Now we arrive at the climax of this revelation. Now I'm going to tell you what the whisper really was, and this will change everything. The whisper was not your enemy trying to destroy you. It was your calling trying to purify you. It was the voice of God disguised, asking the hardest questions, the most painful accusations, to see if you really believed what you said you believed. It was a spiritual mirror being placed before you, reflecting not who you pretended to be but who you really were when all the masks fell. Because God doesn't need your pious lies, doesn't need your memorized faith affirmations, doesn't need your automatic positive confessions. He needs to know who you are when you're bleeding, who you are when everything collapses, who you are when there's no audience, no witnesses, nothing to gain from continuing. And that night you revealed who you really are. And here's the deepest truth of all. The whisper spoke lies about you. Yes, but those lies had a purpose. They exposed the lies you already believed about yourself. They forced to the surface all the insecurities you buried, all the fears you denied, all the wounds you pretended to have healed. And when all that came up, when you were forced to face the most broken, weakest, most pathetic version of yourself, that's when true healing could begin. Because you cannot heal what you don't recognize, cannot transform what you don't admit, cannot transcend what you don't face. And the whisper forced you to face everything, every internal demon, every destructive pattern, every defense mechanism, every ego construction, every comfortable lie. Everything was exposed, brought to light, placed on the table so you could finally deal with it for real. And now, on the other side of that night, you are more whole than you've ever been, not because you no longer have wounds, but because your wounds are now conscious, not because you no longer have weaknesses, but because your weaknesses are now confessed, not because you no longer have fear, but because your fear is now honest, and there is tremendous power in that, a power that people who have never been broken will never have access to. Chosen ones who cross through the night of the whisper become healers of a rare kind. They don't heal with formulas. They heal with presence. They don't minister with memorized words. They minister with authority earned in suffering. They don't offer easy answers. They offer authentic companionship in the dark valley. And that is infinitely more valuable than any eloquent sermon or perfect theological teaching. You now have the credential that cannot be falsified. You were there. You know the darkness from the inside. You heard the whisper and survived. And because of that, when you speak with someone who is crossing through what you crossed through, your words will carry a different weight, a different authenticity, a different authority, because you won't be speaking theory, you'll be speaking testimony. And your testimony will save lives, will free captives, We'll rescue chosen ones who are about to give up because they believed the whisper. Because when you tell your story, when you reveal you survived that night, when you demonstrate it's possible to resist and win, you'll give other chosen ones the most precious thing you can give: hope. Not cheap hope based on blind optimism, but hope rooted in real victory, in proven transformation, in lived resurrection. And this is your mission now. You didn't survive that night just for yourself. You survived to tell the story, to be living proof that the whisper lies, to demonstrate that chosen ones can be broken but cannot be destroyed, to show that there is life, purpose, and power on the other side of the valley of the shadow of death. So now you have a choice. You can keep your story, protect your pain, hide your scars, or you can transform your wound into a weapon, your pain into power, your story into liberation for others. You can refuse to let that night have been in vain. You can decide that every tear you shed, every moment you wanted to give up, every whisper you resisted, all of it will have eternal meaning because you chose to use it to free others. And here we are, at the end of this journey of revelation. But it's not really the end, is it? It's just the beginning of you living as who you really are, the beginning of you assuming the authority you earned, the beginning of you walking with the confidence of one who has already been tested in fire and emerged purer, stronger, truer. That night transformed you into something rare, into something the kingdom of darkness fears, into something the kingdom of light celebrates. You are no longer an ordinary believer struggling to maintain faith. You are a warrior proven in battle, with scars that tell stories of victories won in silence, of resistances no one applauded, of faithfulness no one witnessed but that were recorded in heaven. The whisper in the darkness was the final test before your true manifestation. It was the moment you proved to yourself and to the invisible realms that your calling is stronger than your circumstances, that your identity is deeper than your experiences, that your purpose is more real than any contrary evidence. And now you walk differently, speak differently, see differently, because you know secrets that are only revealed in absolute darkness. You possess wisdom that is only acquired in the deepest valley. You carry an authority that is only forged in the hottest fire. And that makes you exactly what you should be, a fully manifested chosen one. Don't be afraid of what lies ahead. Don't fear the whispers that will still come, because they will come. But now you know how to recognize them, know how to resist them, know how to transform them into fuel for your purpose instead of poison for your soul. You learned the spiritual alchemy of transforming darkness into light, pain into power, test into testimony. And when you feel alone on this journey, remember, all chosen ones crossed through a night like yours. All heard a whisper like yours. All were tested to the limit of what they could bear. And all who are today manifesting their purposes, impacting generations, transforming territories, they got there because they resisted, because they didn't give up, because they chose to believe in the calling more than in the whisper. You are a chosen one, not because you are perfect, but because you are persistent, not because you don't fall, but because you get up. Not because you don't have fear, but because you continue even with fear. And that is what separates chosen ones from ordinary people. This refusal to surrender, this sacred stubbornness, this irrational faithfulness to a calling the world doesn't see but your spirit knows is real. Now I want you to do something. In the comments below, write, "I am a chosen one." Declare it, proclaim it, establish it in the spiritual realm, because public declaration has power. When you assume your identity before witnesses, when you confess who you are without shame, without fear, without reservations, something changes. Portals open, authorities are activated, destinies are accelerated. And if you know someone who is crossing through their own night of whispers, someone who is hearing lies in the darkness, someone who is about to give up on the calling because the test seems impossible, share this video with that person. Be the messenger of hope that someone was for you. Be living proof that it's possible to survive and win. Subscribe to this channel and activate notifications, because more revelations are coming. More truths about the chosen ones are being uncovered. More secrets about this spiritual journey are being revealed. And you need to be here to receive every word, every revelation, every key that was destined for you since before the foundation of the world. Your journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's just beginning. What you crossed through qualified you for what's coming. What you survived prepared you for what you're going to conquer. What you resisted equipped you for what you're going to manifest. Everything had a purpose. Everything had a reason. Everything was part of a greater plan that now begins to reveal itself. You didn't hear that whisper by chance. You didn't cross through that night without reason. You weren't tested that way without purpose. You were prepared, forged, refined, transformed, and now you are ready.